Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Pivoted Success Podcast, hosted by my friend Sean Cochran from TCC Canada and myself, Jared Goldsmith from eSAX Virtual Events. Today, we have Colette Pepin joining us today, and she is the Executive Director for the Centre for Canadian Language Benchmarks, le Centre de Niveau de Compétences Linguistiques Canadiennes. Colette, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Great to be here.
You too. So Colette, we've known each other on and off for many, many years. It's really a nice treat to have you on our podcast today. Colette, let's talk a little bit about your background. What's your business organization all about? And just tell us a bit more about who you are.
For sure. So I'll start with a bit about who I am and then kind of how I got here. And rather than giving you my resume, I'll give you a bit about my journey, because really my personal journey has led to my professional experience and where I am today. So, I mean, all my life, my parents have kind of thrown me into these cultural situations, right? I've often experienced being a minority, being a linguistic minority, and having to rapidly adapt to different countries and cultures, And while my parents, I think they were just trying to give me life experience and a broader perspective, they probably underestimated just how much I took on those values more deeply. And so, as I got older, really, I spent my youth and my young adulthood, maybe all the way up to 30, just adapting and empathizing with that whole experience of having to integrate a new culture. Yeah. So that really drew me to, newcomers and the newcomer experience. And not surprisingly, I went into English language teaching, and I was working with adults and started in education, ESL, and then gradually got interested in the whole administrative side of it and management side of it, which brought me to where I am today, which is ED of a national nonprofit. And we're very niche. So as you said, we're the Centre for Canadian Language Benchmarks, but like what is that? What do we do? Really, essentially, we develop tools and resources for service providers who are conducting language training with newcomers. So all of those programs out there across the country that are teaching newcomers language and that are working with them to give them the skills they need to integrate, to become employed, to really reach their full potential. We're providing resources for them to work with those people.
Well, I have to apologize, Colette, to some of our listeners. This podcast is unfortunately all in English. Je m'excuse, c'est dommage, mais how's your French, Sean?
Ça va.
Now, let's talk about COVID, Colette. We're going to break it off into your personal issues from COVID and then the organizational issues. How were you, or perhaps your family, affected by COVID? You're welcome to disclose as much as you like.
As much or as little. No, with me, it's usually as much. Yeah. So, in fact, I mean, I was affected in a major way. And I can't compare with the people who actually got COVID. So, right away, let's make that clear that, I wasn't affected health-wise, like physically health-wise, but we were all affected differently. And for me, my story is that on March 13th, the day that the stay-at-home order came down was the day I was signing my contract to become ED at the Centre for Canadian Language Benchmarks.
Just jumped right in.
Just jumped right in. And during that time, I was in the middle of doing an MBA, and I have 2 kids and a house as well. So here I had to ask myself, is this the right move? Like, should I continue to sign this? Because it's a job that's demanding. It's a job that has a very high level of responsibility. You're responsible for the entire organization. The board is spread across the country, so there's nobody here on site to guide you through your job. You have to really just figure it out. So I knew I was going to have a challenging year work-wise. And I was doing an MBA full time at the same time. And then I have children. So I said, what do I do? But you know, what it came down to was, first of all, I really abide by the philosophy that you don't learn anything from easy, like, you know, the challenging moments of my life. And I alluded to that in the beginning, like the challenging moments of my life where I was thrown in different cultures, where I didn't speak the language. And I was having to attend institutions where I didn't know what to do, how to act, how to be. All of those challenges were what ended up defining me and my core values and my character. So I said to myself, no, this is where I need to be, because this is my education background interests. I want to work with the newcomer integration experience from a language perspective.
Those types of skills, I can only imagine setting you up for life, getting along in any circumstance. It brings me back. I spent a summer in Japan, and I've never used chopsticks, tried sushi or sake before until I was on the airplane over. And I just had to adapt to everything. And it's the best experience of my life. But it seems like you've done that quite often growing up. So, Sean, is there anything you'd like to ask her before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, it's just so interesting. I was just quietly taking it all in. But for you, I mean, that's a crazy amount of things to stack on top of each other in regular times, never mind COVID times. So I love that you sort of pushed into adversity rather than sort of stepping back and saying, I don't know, this is too much for me. So not only were you stepping into that executive role, but you were stepping into it probably in the weirdest 18 months that have existed in our history anyway. So tell us how that was.
Well, the pressure was high. The pressure was high. And I think I just went into hyper productivity. Like, I've never been more productive. My brain has never been more active. And what I'm going to say might be a little bit controversial, but here's the thing. We have so much more time than we think we have. So it really came down to, how do we use our time? And that changed everything for me. I stopped doing useless things. I stopped doing them. Everything I did was productive or for a reason. And the moments where I did, let's say, brainless activities were required, right? Like I had to turn my brain off, because that was my biggest challenge, is my brain was constantly working. But I came out of this with a hunger and a thirst to continue learning, because I realized the more I stepped up to new challenges and awakened my senses and exposed myself to different ideas, the more I wanted to continue building on those.
That's a really good point. We talked earlier in another episode about being productive, not having to spend an hour in traffic or finding a parking spot and then meeting to meeting, engagement, working on things. And when you're not, what are you doing? You're cleaning the house, you're making life, you're helping the kids, taking the dogs out. And it's just, everything is to become more efficient. And that's a great point, Colette, about time management. I think this is probably around the world, when the textbooks are starting to be written about COVID, that's probably going to be some major chapters. What about the organization, Colette? How have they been affected by COVID?
Goodness, just as much as I had personally. I mean, I arrived in a time of crisis, really, because the team was not set up to work remotely. So I was going into an environment that for 20 years was a paper-based company. They still didn't have electronic funds transfer set up in 2020. They didn't have social media in 2020. So they were very traditional, and they were functioning that way because it's such a niche. It's such a niche. It's such a niche topic, the Canadian language benchmark. So we served a very targeted population, and for those reasons, and for whatever reasons, that's how they were functioning. And it was. So
this was a great push to bring them up into today's technology.
It was. The first thing I had to do was, well, first I had to connect with each individual. I still haven't met the entire team face to face. Yeah, and throughout the past year, we've had hirings. So not only have I not met the team, but the team has not met the team. So I had to learn how to, well, first it was meet everyone individually, listen to them, figure out what the immediate needs are, address all of the immediate needs. So that was number one, was like, who are these human beings before me? And what are their needs? Listening. That was number one. And number two was the infrastructure. Okay, now that I know what the needs are, let's find the tools and put them in place to start meeting those needs. Mm-hmm. So then we did that. And I'll just leave it at that for now. I have some more ideas on that, but let's see if you have any follow-ups.
No, sure. That's great. It's so interesting. And I can only imagine starting a new position like that originally without COVID, having to get everything in order, but also having to sort of pivot and figure out how to digitize the entire team rather immediately too, is quite a challenge. So, I mean, how did you find things? I'm sure that it was an uphill battle at first, but did you find everybody sort of everything fell into place and it worked out all right?
I would say yes. I think
still working on it.
Yeah, everything fell into place. So I guess I'm more of a believer of like, you put them in place, you know, like I'm not a kind of laissez-faire. I'm more of take charge or, you know, intentionally do things type of person. So I think things fell into place because I was working on it, falling into place, you know, I was putting it in place. The way I said it to some of my colleagues was, you know, the first year we had to put our house in order. You know, that's what it was. That whole entire first year was putting our house in order before we could get into working on our strategic plan, before we could get into, you know, we have a number of fiscal challenges and, you know, we're looking to diversify and we have all of our business challenges that we have. So we were working on those, but with a long-term view. In the short term, we had to get ourselves together. So for me, it was about focusing on the people and making sure that was done. And now, yeah, I do think that is done. I feel good about it. I know where we're at. Everybody knows where we're at. We have a great dynamic. And so now it's time to really dig into that strategic plan.
Well, this is a good lead into our next question, Colette. You talked earlier about, you know, getting your house in order. Mm-hmm. That could be very applicable for not only your personal life, but your business as well. So let's talk about how have you personally pivoted for success? So you talked about the house in order, but are you talking about your actual homestead?
No, I meant our business house. Yeah,
okay,
I meant the business house. Yeah, that's what I meant. So how have I personally pivoted for success?
Yeah.
I think, you know, talking about the prioritizing that we were mentioning earlier, that would be a good point. And just an open mind. I really think that's been it. And a calmness to wait and see, to not be drastic, because things in our environment are changing around us every day. So I think it's about keeping an ear to the ground, trying to connect with people. One of my biggest challenges in this has been relationship building because of the remote situation. And it hasn't only been my challenge, but the newer employees who've come on board, they're not able to see the subtleties of the team dynamic. All of our interactions are transactional. Mm-hmm. And that's an unfortunate, right? So, you know, for every character, every element, there's a pro and a con. So the pro of prioritizing and hyper productivity is that you can do more with hyper productivity. But the con is that there's no room for the unexpected interactions, which often lead to useful information that you weren't aware of, or, you know, the next steps, all of those softer pieces that are unplanned. So that's what's missing.
Yeah, I mean, that the impromptu, you know, brainstorming or around the water cooler or lunch or just at somebody's desk. It's, yeah, that's a great point. Let's put your little crystal fedora ball on and look in the future. What are you most excited about, let's say, in the next 6 months to a year?
I think
it could be work, it could be business, personal.
Well, I think in general, I'm excited about the unknown. I think that you have to look at the unknown as potential. So, and if we get a little bit more specific, so that's my kind of philosophical answer. But in fact, what excites me is AI, artificial intelligence, and how it's going to impact learning and how it's going to impact education and language learning. And of course, event planning and networking, like now everything, we're video conferencing. My personal prediction is that, we're going to be holograms next.
Right, cool, yeah.
And I just think there's so much going on with technology and AI. And if we look back in the past 5 years or 10 years, it's evolved much more rapidly than any of us have predicted. So if we just look at trends, we must understand that it's going to continue to evolve more rapidly than we can predict. So what I find exciting is what we don't know, and specifically what we don't know about technology, because it's omnipresent.
Yeah. Like forward thinking in the technological side. Yeah. How can you possibly plan for that? It's like, oh, here's a new technology. Great. Can we adapt it or not? Like, look at iPhones. They weren't, or the internet 20 years ago wasn't around.
Yeah, and can we continue to make them accessible to everyone? Is further AI going to segregate social classes and continue to wedge that gap, or is it going to? What are the ethical decisions our leaders in the community, our business leaders and our politicians? What decisions are they going to make in terms of accessibility? We see that in rural Canada when it comes to learning and education and access to the internet. So all of these things are very exciting to me, and wondering, like, I don't know. I guess I don't want to say, I'm going to say realistic optimist. Can we say that? An optimist, but I don't want to say naive, but I wish I could be. I've learned too much, and especially this MBA, it reinforced a lot of negative stereotypes I already had about large corporations. I'll be honest, I'm not a corporate person, but I went for the MBA for reasons for work. Whereas I thought it would open my mind to corporate ethics and say, oh yeah, these big corporations are not so bad. It actually did the opposite. I was like, oh, these large corporations are worse than I thought. So, what I'm thinking is I'd love to see government and business start, working together to have the right regulations so that we can see accessibility to these new things that are coming out.
Right. Sean, would you like to jump in? Oh, sorry, Sean, we can't hear you right now. Perhaps you could refresh your screen.
There we go. Sorry.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
I've been having some technical difficulties, so the joys of our new technological decisions, right? No, Colette, one of the biggest things for me was just when you were implementing all of your technological change, what was it that really sort of hit you and your team the worst in terms of challenges?
Yeah, well, day-to-day operation-wise, it was that we had to come up with policies and processes around everything that we were doing now. And some things weren't as straightforward as you might think, because as a nonprofit, it's our financial structure is very complex because we work with restricted funds and unrestricted funds. It's not like in a for-profit business where you have money in and money out. Oh, no, forget that. It's money in, but for this. Money in, but for that. And so making ends meet is very difficult. We often have gaps. And when it comes to, setting up our new, let's say, electronic funds transfer processes, well, we have to track and document in a certain way to meet certain requirements for funders. And that causes a lot of extra work. So it was all of those internal, how are we going to do this to meet the needs of the various checkpoints that we have to answer to?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, any organization, you're obviously going to face challenges when you're implementing something so drastically as well. But I mean, for the complexities you deal with in the not-for-profit, I mean, it's definitely an even more complex challenge to sort of deal with.
Yeah, that certainly feels that way. So, we're still working through those. We have systems in place, but the technology side is going to force us to constantly be looking at how we're doing things and our operational effectiveness internally. This whole COVID, pivoting for COVID, there's an internal impact and there's an external impact. And that's the way that we've really had to take it. But there's been adaptations to both aspects. The external side is all of our products we're mostly a producer of intellectual property. We don't provide direct service to newcomers, as I mentioned earlier. And everything used to be on paper and publications that we would mail to people. And we have this whole shipping set up. And, all of that is goodbye. Now we have to work for having interactive online publications. And so, we had to pivot in every aspect of our business.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the word pivot. I mean, that's the name of our podcast, because so often Sean and I were chatting over the months, is we just hear doom and gloom, organizations, businesses, personal, mental health. But there are people like yourself, head of the organization, who have adapted reasonably well. So this brings us back to the purpose of our podcast, is to shine light and inspiration and knowledge sharing so that it could be a form of acceptance and help for others. So thank you, Colette. Speaking of help for others, let's talk about some wisdom. Would you happen to have any words of wisdom for some of our viewers or listeners today?
Well, what's worked for me is seeing challenges is exciting, and having fun with solving problems. And I that might be easier said than done, but it's a mindset. It really is a mindset. So work is a series of problems to solve. It doesn't matter what your job is, whether you're cleaning toilets or CEO of Google, it's a series of problems to solve. So some more exciting to solve than others, granted. But if you have that mindset of challenge is exciting, I think that's something that can help. I think another thing is, recognize a good idea for what it is. It's just an idea, So don't go down with the ship of the idea. You have a good idea today, but then you learn new information and suddenly that idea is not good anymore. It's not good in the new context.
I love this idea, Colette. It's like, if you wake up every day and think, oh, I have to reply to emails, I have to check my Facebook, I hate Facebook, blah, blah. Or it's like, I can't wait to get started. What challenges I'm going to have today? Yes, you have your to-do list, but to be open to it and just, like you said, just accept it and use it as part of your mindset. That's a very wonderful, very, very useful point.
Yeah, well, it's worked for me. For sure, and the whole concept about letting go of ideas. I had what I thought was this great idea in the spring for us to diversify our revenue stream. We were going to offer a service, and then I came to realize, because of that new constraints were imposed on us by the funder that had nothing to do with my idea, but there was an impact of those constraints and how I could allocate my resources. So suddenly, this new service was going to cost me 3 times what it would have had I been able to allocate resources the way I wanted. So I went, well, this amazing idea is no longer amazing. Okay, okay, suck it up, sleep on it, be disappointed for a night, and then get a new idea. So that's kind of what happened. And I think if there's a final point, I would say don't stop learning. Don't stop learning. You never arrive. Don't arrive. And I know it's a cliche. It's the journey, not the destination, but it's true. It's true. You can, and that's everywhere in your life. Like I remember when my kids were young, and I would go for walks with them when my son was like 2, and they smell the roses. They smell the roses, they touch the slugs, they look at the sidewalks, they stop every 5 steps. And in the beginning, it was frustrating for me because I was trying to get to the park. We're getting to the park. He was like, it didn't matter to him if we ever got to the park, but look at all the things we saw along the way. And so I think that just is an analogy that you can apply for life, in business, in everything.
I'm going to have to go through this podcast a few more times. You're talking about so much wisdom that's going right over my head right now. I need time to digest it. Wow, this is amazing.
Well, yeah, no, I love reflecting. See, I said my brain with that MBA, I was just reading so much and thinking so much. And so had a lot of just been in overdrive, I think. And that's something that I said to myself. I finished the MBA earlier this summer, and I said, I don't want to lose that, because I know as soon as the requirement goes away to engage so much with the new information and challenge myself, I have to discipline myself because I don't have anything hanging over my head. So I've been thinking about, what can I do? Could I join a debate club? Could I, should I force myself to read 2 new articles a week? I don't know what it is yet, but I'm thinking about what personal challenge can I give myself to keep my mind learning.
That's so great, Colette. So as we sort of wind up, I hope anyway, this pandemic, and we look to the other side, what are you personally sort of most excited to get to do again, or what are you looking forward to on the other side?
Well, a lot of things. I mean, for me, I guess it's not just the pandemic that's winding down, but I'm getting some time back in my life, just going down to one job. But I'm looking forward to my children experiencing programs and a social life and sports and activities and arts and culture. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing, is getting out there, socializing for all of us, getting together again. I've never been a big events kind of person, like concerts and that sort of thing, but I'm a very big house party person, I guess you could say. I love the 10 to 20 person gathering in the backyard barbecues, and that's what I'm looking forward to most, I think, personally.
Actually, I just got a new deck installed. I might have have people over again. I'll give you a shout, both of you. Let's talk about the community, Colette. How can the community help your organization? Is there anything that we could do, any ask that you could think of?
Wow, that's so kind. So actually, I think there's a bit of this is on us. Our organization needs to be more present in the community. So that's one of the things I'd like to work on. I don't think anybody knows who we are. We've been so niche, and we've kept ourselves so tightly knit with our service provider organizations and partner organizations. And because we're national, we're not Ottawa-centric by any means. So I think we need to get out there a bit more in the community. So it's really on us to look for opportunities for people to learn about us and who we are. Yeah.
I could help you with a few connections to help you get more involved in the community. My pleasure. Sean, we're going to be wrapping up soon. Do you have any other questions for Colette?
I was just curious, going back to the organization a little bit. I mean, everybody's had to switch the way they do things, digitize, and go virtual. On the other side, do you see your organization keeping those sorts of traits, or do you sort of look to get back together again so that you can be a little bit more office-centric, or however you might have been in the past?
Oh, that's such a good question, and one I've been thinking about for a year. Like, it's been in my mind. And then finally this summer, I did a deep dive and made some choices, made some decisions. And what I decided to do was, obviously, we're going to retain some of these features forever. So I've always been a fan of remote work. And I really believe that you get the best out of an employee by giving them autonomy, and by treating them like an adult. I've never been a fan of clocking in and clocking out. So what I did over the weekend was I took down a wall, actually, between 2 offices, and created this super large boardroom. So what we're trying to create now, and we painted and we redid the floors and the ceilings, and we're creating a space. I want to create opportunities for people to get together, not forced, but I want to have a place where people have a desire to go to because they see the benefits of getting together. So you don't have to be there from 8 to 4, 7 to 3, or 9 to 5, but you have to show your face. And here are the opportunities to show your face. You can come in for a few hours, make those connections that you want to make, and return home. So to me, that's the way to really get the most out of people and have engaged employees. Yeah. That's
another good point, Colette. I think a lot of organizations are realizing that, people are adults. You can't just, micromanaging everybody. You have your responsibilities. You have a certain amount of hours in a day. Can you get them done or not? And if you have to take your kids for an appointment in the afternoon, that's fine. Nobody's clocking in, clocking out, but maybe they work better at 2 in the morning. You're leaving it up to them.
Yeah, honestly, I've had such good results. I came in with that attitude that we're all adults here, and a results-based approach. So, I mean, we have legal obligations to assign a set number of hours in a day, but they don't have to be conducted between a certain period. You have to work with your business's need. Back to your question, Sean, like some businesses have a need for client services. Okay, well, then you have to have people to deliver those client services between X hours and X hours. But, once you evaluate what are your business needs, then you're in a better position to try to mitigate what your employees need and what your business needs, and you find something in the middle. You're never going to please everybody. Some people, hopefully you'll please somebody, but you're never going to please everybody is what I wanted to say.
Yeah. And as long as, like you said, we just have to meet our obligations. Sometimes, it's funding or external partners, stakeholders, and then do what's best for the long term. I mean, the COVID.
Sorry, Jared. Sorry to cut you off. I was just going to say, Colette, it's so amazing to hear that mindset, because I hear so many different sides of that from employers and operators of businesses, because everybody's gotten used to previously to being able to see their people all the time and know that's how they're working. Well, that isn't the way to monitor people. I mean, you need to figure out ways to challenge people and to monitor them without having to see them for those set hours, right? So it's having an open mind and being able to allow them the opportunity to come into a collaborative space that you can offer as an office if that's what they want. And if not, then they can work from home or work from wherever makes the most sense, as long as they're productive and able to help in the way that they can, right?
Absolutely. And I find it allows us to bring our best self to work. I really do, because you're not forced into a situation when you're not emotionally able that day. We all have different challenges. We all have a different life. So some days you want to not have a bunch of meetings or to talk to people. You want to just sit and do your work. And I think it's really important that you give people the opportunity to bring their best self to work. Then as an employer, you can set your standard. It has to be fair. It has to be just. And if I feel like if I give people the opportunity to be their best self and to bring their best self to work, and I know I'm offering them supports, then I also have the opportunity to set a standard and to ask for a certain level of work.
Absolutely. Now, what about the way people can get in touch with you and your organization, Colette?
Yes, well, it's not really by our landline at this point. I'm still hemming and hawing on that. We only have our landlines now because it's connected to our internet service provider. But now that I've taken down the wall, we're actually going to be removing some of our landlines and just reduce to a few. So the best way to reach us is always by email, which is on our website. There we have an info@language.ca. My email is on the website as well, cpepin@language.ca. And I use my cell phone. People can call me on my cell phone as well. That's what I'm using now. And email's the best way. And then we can set up a call. I prefer that.
Sure. Any last minute thoughts, Sean?
No, that's great, Colette. Thank you so much for joining us. It's so nice to hear different perspectives, not from just the typical for-profit businesses, but from the not-for-profit sector, and just to see how people are trying to wade through this mess. So it's been great to listen to everything you've had to say, and thanks so much for the wisdom you've imparted.
Yes, I mean, and we're not through it yet, are we, right? So maybe next year you're going to have a 2.0 pivoted for success, the aftermath. I don't know.
Yeah, let's hope. That is my hope for sure.
Well, thank you so much, Colette. So today, folks, we were joined by Colette Pepin, the Executive Director of the Center for Canadian Language Benchmarks. Thank you very much, Colette. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.